Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicating to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Lit Happens. If you're tuning in today with us, this is going to be part one of a four-parter of our essay text type episode that we're going to be discussing, looking at some of the key elements that your students need to effectively craft essay responses. So as always, we've got Adriel and Belle here today. Hi, Adriel.
Hello, how are we going?
We're going well, I think. Everyone's plugging
That's
along,
good.
getting into the terms, report writing season's coming along.
Lots of busy. It's a busy period, definitely.
100%. Well, Adriel, we should probably tell our listeners that we've got a new little segment, that we're going to be introducing now at the start of every episode, just for a quick 5-10 minute conversation, discussion, a bit of a laugh. We're going to be introducing, guys, a new segment called Lit or Quit. So every week we'll introduce something about like curriculum or maybe the classroom or just everyday teaching culture. And we're going to have some fun having a discussion on, is it lit or should we quit? So today's Lit or Quit, Adriel, is teaching poetry to reluctant year 10 students. Is that lit or does it make you want to quit?
Look, let's put on our honest cap here.
That's a doozy.
I think so, yeah. Look, to your reluctant students, as if you were to say like your enthusiastic year 10 students will definitely be a lit sort of thing, but reluctancy definitely plays sort of a part. So for me, I'm still going to say lit. I think it's cool that kids sort of understand poetry. Especially the reluctant ones. I've done this and had experience with this with, say, some of my boys' classes that I've taught poetry to in year 10. And, at times, you can't see too many of the grey hairs, especially if you're listening online. But I would say that this would be one of the, I'd say this is one of the main causes for a lot of that stress, or maybe lack of hair in certain places. They sort of get me with like hey, sir, how's your hairline going, sir? Or it's because of you guys that I'm losing. Yeah, it's because of you guys I'm losing my hairline here. There we go.
100%, it's your fault.
Definitely think I still think it's lit though, because at the start it can be quite a struggle. Obviously, trying to sort of engage them with poetry, like, sir, why do we have to use poetry? Or what am I going to use this? I'm not going to be going and speaking in beautiful poetic prose or, verse when I'm ordering things at the shops. And that's a general sort of conversation you have with the kids. But generally sort of when we bring it back to this idea of getting them to think beyond the box and understanding the beauty of poetic language and understanding just how they can speak. Like, this is one of those big contributors to their written expression, I would often say, is just understanding how poetry functions, especially the language. So I definitely think it's quite lit, to be honest. In regards to our classroom and teaching. But that comes with that little caveat there where it's like, at times it's a hard journey, but you see, it's like finding a diamond, isn't it? In the rough there. Eventually you keep digging away, and it becomes quite lit.
I like that. That's it. I like that expression you had with like the awkward smile and the gritted teeth. Like, I feel like every teacher's are like, poetry within disengaged classes. Look, I agree. There's definitely maybe lessons where you're like, God, I wish I could quit this topic right now. And I think in my first and second year, teaching poetry to disengaged classes took a lot of getting used to, because you're absolutely right. The first thing they say is, well, what relevance does this have? And that's not the way that they voice that either. But exactly. All the different, why would I do this? What's that gonna mean?
Colorful language.
Very color. Yeah. And I'm like, you should channel that into poetry. And they're like,
that's
stop.
true.
But I think once you I think once you've done it a few times, you realize how important it is, I think, for especially those disengaged students to connect with poetry. And then I think you get really clever about, because I know that in our schools, we don't always have, control over the poetry set.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the topic, everybody must do the same. But I think what I've seen, particularly in the last few years, is when schools are teaching poetry, they definitely will have a range of poetry. So they might have like HPG poetry, and they might have a more mixed ability approach, and maybe a set that might be better or more adaptable to get buy-in from students who are struggling. So I think if we look at it there's actually a lot of flexibility, and sometimes I just get those disengaged kids with a bit of a song, and get them into it. I definitely can see where there's times where we would want to quit, but I also agree with you and think ultimately it's quite lit, and the more we persevere, and if we show that excitement, and then the kids are like, okay, maybe I'll give that a go,
That energy is infectious from the teacher. I think also, like, when we often say poetry, I mean, we're probably susceptible to this as well. We often think of like language that is not accessible to us, and I think that's what the students often think about. So as you were just saying, if you're coming into it with a bit of enthusiasm, a bit of energy, and look, it won't always work out. Sometimes we'll be like, oh, that's a great poem, and you're so excited about it, but you gotta have to think about it. You've got your 10 kids who are 15, 16 years of age, have not had that much experience in terms of life and language and an understanding of some intricacies that we generally engage with. However, if we can find ways to link it to their narrative or their life, it definitely becomes something that's quite more engaging for them. So, like you just said, modern day or contemporary songs, which are all forms of poetry, is a nice sort of hook in engaging the kids. And they all love music, so really, if they love their music, they're all lovers of poetry. So you can catch them with those little sort of things, and definitely, as I was saying there, have some relevance in terms of what's contemporary. So slam poems, songs, as you've just sort of mentioned, which are like your modern day ballads. I know a lot of people may cast a bit of judgment upon me, but if you're a lover of, say, Taylor Swift, which I am not part of that.
I was going to say, are you a Swiftie? Are you an undercover Swiftie?
I am definitely not part of that crowd, so I apologize to whoever does, but look, that's just not my flavor there. And see, in saying this is the conversations that we can have with the kids. So if you were to ask me if I'm a Swiftie, I'd definitely be going towards the quit party just there. But but yeah, look, things that engage with the kids, I think that's probably really cool. And once you do get that engagement and enthusiasm, it's definitely something that is quite lit.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your perspective. I might actually put this as a poll on our social media, whether people feel that it's lit or they'd rather quit. And maybe we could get some engagement, comment in the socials, tell us what you think. We would really, really love that dialogue for sure.
Love that. Awesome.
All right. Well, let's get into our episode then for today. Adriel, what do you reckon?
Yes, let's get into essay writing, isn't it? Or what is an essay response?
Yeah, that's it. As we did say when we opened, this is part 1. So we're going to look at breaking down. Today's going to be overall essay writing, and then we'll look at doing specific segments on, an intro, the body, the conclusion, and we're also going to have a bit of a discussion today as well on the different language in terms of the bands when we're looking at students producing, thoughtful versus effective writing. So I think that will be a really, really valuable conversation that we can start today and then continue to address as we get through our parters. But I think for today, part 1, it's all about understanding the key elements of an essay that will help students to articulate their ideas with clarity and also with persuasion. We need to look at the language and the form of essay or persuasive essay writing here. So let's dive into our discussion then, Adriel. We've got a few questions just to help us highlight these essential components. And then I think we can talk to that with some of our own experiences and some examples as well.
Good.
And also, before I forget, if you are checking this out on YouTube, thank you, first off. And secondly, you'll note that today we've actually got a 2-page little cheat sheet
Yeah.
with some of the
Yeah.
key elements
That's good to
of.
see.
Thank you, Adriel. Yeah, Adriel's the master over here, getting the resource up on the video so you can see. Thank you, Adriel. And just a bit of a cheat sheet to accompany some of the key points we're making today. It is free. You'll be able to see it through YouTube. You'll be able to find it in our show notes. And we just hope that it's, an extra little visual or guide that you can use, that you can project, whatever we can do to help you guys. It's really our mission, isn't it, Adriel?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, Bill's been fantastic in developing these little resources here just to sort of give away to you guys. There's no costs. And it's just to help you guys, during these tough times at the moment. But we say no cost. I don't know, one thing that we would love from you guys, as we've sort of mentioned before, is just a bit more exposure. So really engage with us. I think, get involved with us on our socials. What would you like more of? We'll speak into this as we continue to go and see what we can produce for you guys, just to help you guys out. Because we're here for everyone. We know that teaching is definitely going through an interesting phase at the moment, especially English teaching. We love it. And we're really passionate to help you guys out with. So yeah, look, Bill's master at these little sheets, and we're really privileged and honored to have these.
And we'd really love to make some more for you guys. So if you tell us what topics you like, you know that you're going to score a little freebie as well. So that's a nice little sweep, that too. All right, well, we might start with, I think, the basic thing that all teachers often begin with when they're trying to explicitly teach and model essay writing with their English students is covering what is the purpose of an essay response. What is its goal, its aim, what's it trying to achieve?
Yeah, awesome. So generally we have to look back at the form of an essay. It is a persuasive type of text, and I always go back to like this with my students. In primary school, they would have done what they called expositions, and I say they're like your foundational forms of an essay. It's presenting a one-sided argument or a point of view, and backing it up using certain points of evidence and maybe techniques they might have looked at. I don't know about you, Bill, but like when we were in primary school and we used to sit in front of the classroom there, legs crossed and whatnot, and your teachers used to have those little. Actually, I'm pretty sure I've seen them in your classroom, Bill. You had those little text type forms
those
that
charts?
you used to post up. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Temu. Now, back in the day, we had to make them ourselves. Now, jump on to, we're not sponsored by Temu, but I'm just saying, thank you, Temu.
100%. No, so what I'm sort of engaging with is kids have already looked at this type of or style of response through primary school all the way through into the early sort of junior years as well. And we start to look at essays as this persuasive response. Now, remember, the purpose of an essay is to convey an argument. And when we do that argument, we're going to introduce what we call a thesis statement, which we'll move into in a little bit. But this is arguing a certain point of view and giving a clear argument or analysis on, the idea that is being presented. So we often say this with students: your thesis should not sit on the fence. You have to argue one point or the other. It's like a yes or a no, true or false sort of thing. But we are going to step away from that. It's just to get people to think about, okay, we need a one-sided argument. And generally, we have to look at this thesis statement that engages with the needs of the question. I think that's where a lot of students will generally sort of fall away from.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't just respond to the question in a general form. Like we look back at that iceberg sort of analysis. If we look at that metaphor, students will often look at the iceberg and they'll look at the tip of the iceberg. They don't prepare a response that engages with all the depth that is often seen under the water. So it's probably a nice sort of way. I'll see later on, I'll probably do a little video for us on our socials. I used this little analogy with the iceberg and, students engaging with the question in a way that encourages global warming. This is the way I sort of signpost it for them, where they want to see like the sea level sort of rise there, where they only give the surface level response. And so, well, you guys really don't care about the planet when it comes to your essay responses. I won't get too much into it here, but like think of ways in which you
That's
can
a cool
engage kids with
analogy.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very
Think about
engaging. Mm-hmm.
think of because this is the stuff that will signpost them later on when it's under pressure. Okay, what did my teacher say? What are some of the things engaging with these essays that allow me to actually convey a clear argument that will allow for an in-depth analysis and so on and so forth. So when we're looking at the thesis statement, make sure they are engaging with a main argument which they want to be conveying through the entirety of the essay. That's very, very, very significant for a persuasive response. And I think sort of we've mentioned this before. A good thesis statement here is the bedrock. It's the cornerstone of a good persuasive response. If the thesis statement is not clear, it means that your reader, your teachers, the markers at the HSC Center for our bands, our 11 and 12 students, will not understand the clear direction and not have a good understanding of the clarity of your response. It'll be all over the shop. So, going back to like that purpose of an essay, just to sort of summate it a little bit here, it is to remember convey a clear argument. That's probably the big thing in a deep and effective manner, whether it be through analysis, critical evaluation. I think we're going to look at some of these verbs later on, whether in this episode or later in a later sort of little episode. But these are the things that we really do need to consider when it comes to the purpose of an essay.
Yeah, that's right. Because the more thoughtful they're going to be in their answer and response to the question, the stronger their thesis will be and their argument will be more sustained. Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, okay, let's get into that part now. So once we kind of sum up that overall purpose of it, you've talked a little bit about a strong thesis. What are some tips for teachers and students alike in terms of what a strong thesis statement might look like or sound like or might include or involve?
Okay, so there's a few things that we'll want to sort of consider when we're looking at like our band 6, let's say a band 6 response in the HSC. And this is sort of what we're gearing our students towards with a good thesis statement. Now, remember, a band 6 essay response, according to the HSC sort of NESA guidelines, is going to generally be sophisticated, it's sustained, it's insightful engagement with a question. And again, like this is outlined by NESA sort of band descriptors. Now, in keeping this in mind, we need to understand that a thesis statement needs to be perceptive, it needs to be clear, and it needs to directly address the question, and making sure that we maintain that argument in a cohesive manner throughout the entirety of the essay. Now, we've used some big language here for the kids in the advanced cohort. They should be understanding this. However, we still probably need to scaffold this for them. So how do we need to, how are we sort of looking at the language here? This is probably going to be a big sort of thing. Now, what does clarity mean, for example? So if we're looking at this as a key characteristic, and then we probably, let's just move into like the next page here for our little cheat sheet here. We're going to start to look at a few key things here. One of the key characteristics for a good thesis or an effective thesis statement is that the thesis is concise and is easily comprehended. So it's easily comprehensible. So if your marker or yourself as a student or a teacher are reading it and you don't understand what the purpose or what direction this essay is going to take, well, that's probably the first step that we need to sort of encourage our students with. What is the argument that you are addressing here? How are you responding to the question? And once we sort of get that, like we then start to move into specificity. All right. So with your thesis statement, once you've got it concise and maybe, easily understandable there, the specificity means that it delineates the essay's scope and key argument. So we've got a certain amount of points that are going to be key. We're just looking at these ideas. Because remember, they've only got a finite amount of time to develop a good essay. If they're in the essay, in the exam conditions. Obviously, if they're doing a hand-in task, this is probably going to be a little bit more polished here. The big thing is this, though. A key thesis or an exemplary thesis here, it needs to address the thematic or conceptual elements of the question. I would err more towards like that conceptual element stage. So it allows for, an understanding of the concept on a deeper level. And a good way to sort of look at this is, remember that a band 6 thesis statement is generally going to be precise, insightful. It's going to establish a nuanced argument that guides the essay. And also, it transcends a mere restatement of the question. I think a lot of students and teachers like myself have fallen into this trap before, where we sort of say, hey, just reword a few things in the question, and there we go, there's your thesis statement. For the higher order students, we need to sort of look at this with a bit more depth and a bit more scope. So it transcends a mere restating of the question. So what the thesis statement should do, it should offer an original perspective that addresses the question's conceptual underpinnings. I think that's very, very important there. So yeah, there's a few sort of things there that we like to consider. I also think this, now just be mindful of this, it needs to have a little bit of flexibility as well, okay? So it must allow for the exploration of multiple points while remaining focused. Now, don't get this confused with the writing of a discursive essay, which presents multiple perspectives in a formal manner. We'll get into that in a future sort of episode. But what the flexibility, when we're looking at a flexible thesis statement, is it allows the exploration of multiple points that support your argument. So it's varied, it's wide, because a lot of the time students can become so fixated with, let's say we're looking at characterization or the development of character, and the whole essay will then just be on character, which doesn't allow for you to explore an insightful, well-rounded, conceptual sort of response. And I think that's something that's quite significant. So yeah, there's a few things here. Belle's definitely covered this with our little cheat sheet here, and we'll definitely, you know, be adding to this with our little videos and how-tos as we do continue on. But remember, as teachers, we should encourage our students to develop their thesis statements after thoroughly analyzing the question. It's not a one and done thing as well. It's something that requires refinement during the planning stages in order to align best with the question. And also, if they're prepping this for the HSC, you know, how can we make this adaptable as well to a variety of questions?
Absolutely.
I think that's quite significant. So yeah, those are a few things. I apologize, I sort of may have gone a little bit more in depth or overboard there, but
that's okay.
I think
that's fine.
It's quite significant for students to understand this. Yeah.
Well, it is, because it's the rest of your essay is null and void if the thesis is not strong. Like everything has to tie in. That's where we get into that point of it being sustained, right? And I've noticed some students like their very first sentence of their intro to be their thesis statement, and then qualify that a little bit. But I've also seen on the reverse, students who like to start with a sort of a restate or a conceptualization of the question, and then work their way and finish with the thesis statement. And I always, I mean, I know that I prefer that. Like, even as a high school student, I prefer to work my way into the thesis. But I know a lot of students, and also other English teachers I've worked with, that always swear by, for them, starting with the thesis. And I think, as I always say to my guys, as long as the entire intro is set up in a way to support your thesis, regardless of if it's first and last, it will still be, I think, effective. And I think you made some excellent points there about like that conceptual nature of it, because I find that's what really separates the A's and the B's. The B's might be like trying to kind of restate the question, but the A's will actually be interpreting the question, and therefore they say something about the question. They don't just agree with it per se, but they try and do something with that, going in line with what their interpretation of the text is. But like you said, definitely in the next episode, we're going to go through this in much, much more detail. But okay, perfect. So we understand the purpose of the essay. We've got our thesis statement. Maybe now we should talk a little bit about how teachers might support students in structuring their essay responses. What's the typical formula? Obviously, there are a lot of different ways we can go as well, but what seems to be a more generalized way to do that?
Awesome. So when we're looking at our body paragraphs or the structure of our responses here, like we've got in our little cheat sheet, you can probably see here, it says how to structure your essay. So obviously we're going to want to make sure that our essay adheres to a logical and a cohesive structure. I think those are the two words that we need to really emphasize with our students. Now, it's going to come in the form of an introduction. We've just spoken a little bit about what the introduction includes. So it's a thesis statement. We'll go into this a little bit more in our next episode, but it should provide a little bit of a summary of what the essay is going to hold in response to your thesis. After which time then we move to our body paragraphs there, which includes the conclusion. Sorry, not the conclusion. our first, second, maybe third paragraph. All right, and these need to be elevated, I guess, through seamless transitions with a purposeful organization. So, what do we look at when we're looking at our introduction here? Like I just said, it needs to engage with the question. It introduces your text, the purpose, the audience, context, provides a clear thesis statement, and we then move on to the first body paragraph. Now, this is very significant. Every single body paragraph must begin or have somewhere in the first few lines a clear topic sentence that supports the thesis. These are like your mini thesis arguments. And it's very, very significant.
That's a great way to look at it. Like an umbrella approach, kind of. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And typically, like, you'll generally have about 3 to 4 body paragraphs. I work on the premise of an essay being somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 words for students as they start to prep for this, which means your body paragraphs will probably be anywhere from about 250 to 350 words in length. And so if you want like a general structure, the introduction maybe 150 to 200 words, maybe 150 or so. Body paragraphs about
like
250.
Intro, I like a 100 word intro.
Yeah, something that just frames your response, and then this and the body paragraphs is where you sort of go into the meat. This is where you provide the meat of your response. It's about 250, 350 words each, depending on how many you use. And then your conclusion is, again, nice, short, sharp, sort of summative sort of response. But in your body paragraphs, make sure you employ like your little writing structures. Now, we are people that often use the PEAL writing structure, which is your points, your evidence, your explanation, your link. Now, remember, kids will take this literally. So please scaffold this with your students.
Yes.
Okay, so they'll just be like, oh, I've got my point, I've got my one piece of evidence, my one explanation, and then the link, Whatever writing platform you use, please be sure to scaffold it with your students. So go through exemplar text with them, get them to maybe, instead of having to write it down with them at first, maybe if you've had some past students, give them like a paragraph and go through, well, how have they used for me, it's like the PEAL structure or sometimes the pedal structure, whatever the kids are comfortable with. And really get them to sort of identify it, color code those responses so they can see where everything is where everything is occurring.
That's so true.
Yeah. And then after that, that's when you can get them to start maybe constructing these paragraphs. I find when I've often gone into, hey guys, write a body paragraph, which I have been susceptible of doing, it's not as effective as scaffolding it, laying the framework for your students, and then moving into like the apply your skills now, so the teacher modeling part is very, very important there.
Yeah, that's true, because there's so many different acronyms and a variety of ways you can produce a body paragraph, and not just between English teachers and English schools, but even across subject areas within a high school. So I think you want to, and a lot of schools have a very specific writing platform. That is the school's platform that they try and encourage all the KLAs to work within. So if students are constantly getting mixed messages, that can be really frustrating and difficult for them too. I often try in that early kind of prelim, when we've started the prelim course, I'll go through a few of those different ones. Like I say to my class, okay, which ones do we know or do we know about or of? And I'll throw them up on the board, and I'll kind of just let them see the pattern and how all of them are effective as long as they've got the right features in the body. And when we do our episode on body paragraph, we're going to go through that in much more depth. But I find just the visual comparison of them all on the board. And then I'm like, so basically, what do we all need? We all need a topic sentence. We all need to have evidence. as in
Yeah.
quotes, direct quotes. We all need to have techniques. We all need to elaborate. And then I find some students will prefer to stick with the school's platform, which is totally fine. And I can support that. But I sometimes have students are like, my flow of writing doesn't actually align with that. And then I'll encourage them to pick one that works, as long as they then color code and make sure that all the things that they need are in there. Yeah. So that's it. Because there's a lot of flexibility here too, but also, I mean, there's also a bit of school politics there with who's using what and what the platform is. So I think
we're not here to rock
judge.
the boat. We're not here to rock the boat,
No.
But
I think you are an expert on your class, and then you can also judge what's effective. And I think we're just telling you all these things because they're all things that we need to consider within our school context as well.
Yeah, I think also like this is something that you can hook your students in with. Say like you've got kids like, why are we doing essay writing? Well, one of the things, and we can say this to even our fellow peers in the teaching sort of scope here, where this essay writing skill is cross KLA. If they can understand how to write a good essay, it's going to be effective for them in all their subjects. And so way we can engage our students. And look, if you have any friends that want to know how to write essays, say for example, you've got someone in another subject who, hey, because I often have this, my kids are struggling to write essays, get them to watch these videos or listen to these podcasts. It'll be fantastic for them. But there's a few things that we need to consider for body paragraphs. And I'll just quickly go through them very quickly. Remember, we've got our topic sentence, which links back to your thesis statements. We've got sophisticated evidence. There's a selection of sophisticated evidence. I want to use this word. We'll go through these verbs in another episode afterwards. We're sort of engaging with these surface level for today's ep. But this is where we select precise quotations or examples that demonstrate a comprehensive textual knowledge, not just a surface level textual knowledge. We want a perceptive analysis. So we want to analyze how the techniques convey meanings, especially in an English response, linking them to the question's themes, concepts, or maybe even some of the module sort of ideas, which are very, very important. We want maybe a little bit of that rubric integration as well, where we incorporate sort of module-specific ideas to demonstrate an understanding, all depending on whether this is part of addressing the thesis statement and the question that is at hand. And then obviously a critical engagement as well. So if you are teaching an advanced English course, this is very, very important, but they might consider alternate sort of interpretations or maybe counter arguments to showcase the depth of their thought in these responses. So that's quite important there. And then we finish off with the conclusion, which is where we restate our thesis statement in the light of the evidence that we presented through the body paragraph. It provides a synthesis of the key ideas or arguments that we've presented in the response. And I would often get students to conclude with a statement that underscores the argument's broader implications. So what are the consequences? What are the effects? And please, and this is probably a common thing that I'll see through all of the resources online that they will engage with, a conclusion must not introduce new ideas to the text. Please don't introduce new ideas. It's very, very important. So, a few things there to get us thinking. No,
that's great. And the conclusion is a nice barometer when I find that because the students have gotten through the essay and then the conclusion is just the end, there's almost like they don't have that stress or that pressure. Like they feel like, the weight is lifted. They've come to the end. And then I think the conclusion's a good barometer to be like, now go back and check your intro and make sure that it's all succinct. If that was your point, if you made that nice overall point in your conclusion, did you introduce that in some way in the intro, and did you actually represent that and follow that through within your body? It's a nice way to make sure that they've got that, like you were saying, cohesion, and that it's sustained as well. All right then. Well, that was excellent. Thank you so much, Adriel. We might just talk a little bit about, we've got two more things to do, as like you said, a bit of a surface level episode. But we might talk for a few minutes about the role that evidence plays within an essay response. I know that particularly, when you're in an advanced course, it's the bread and butter. Like it gets to a point where it's like, I don't care what you say if you do not proof it. Like it means nothing if you haven't brought it back to evidence, because I think that's where it's an argument, because you've got justifiable direct evidence. And not only that you've got the direct quoting, but it's that you're also engaging with your language as well. And it's definitely, I think sorry.
Yeah, no, keep going. Yeah, you're good.
I was just gonna say that what was I gonna say? No, that's what I was gonna say. When I think about the years of marking, the way that the student moves between the bands in the marking criteria is highly dependent on what they're doing with their analysis and how they're engaging with it. It's a big discriminator, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive, and it's quite significant for us to sort of understand this when we're looking at our sort of responses here. Now, evidence is fundamental, especially if we're looking at like those band 6 essays, which we're working towards. I often use like an analogy for the students, and I'll use the courthouse analogy, which is, you know, you're either a defendant or a prosecutor, and whoever it may be, you know, say you're a defendant, and your lawyer or your barrister can argue all of these things, but if they don't have a clear set out case in terms of the clear direction as to why you're not guilty of committing a certain crime that is based on evidence, what luck do you have of the judge sort of ruling in your favor? And you can ask the kids this, and this is where this sort of approach with evidence and its importance plays a significant role across KLAs as well. Say you're doing a history essay, say you're doing like a legal studies or a business study, whatever essays that you're doing in those arts-based sort of subjects, if you are not providing evidence that is relevant, your response is null and void, or it won't score the marks that is needed. So remember, this provides, so evidence provides the foundation for the persuasive argument. Okay, it's very, very significant because it allows, you know, a greater understanding of how well you have engaged with the textual study in particular. So when we're starting to look at our evidence, remember the key words is just not whatever you've read in the introduction, whatever you've read in the conclusion of whatever text you've read, which is what students can do, or whatever Spark Notes or whatever other subjects online, you know, suggest as quotes. We want to see a clear
AI even.
Exactly. But it needs to be relevant and specific evidence. That is very, very important. So making sure that we're encouraging our kids to choose quotations or examples that directly support the argument and reflect a deep textual familiarity. That's very important. I think also when we're looking at evidence, it needs to be a technique-focused analysis. So like the how meaning is constructed. So they want to be able to identify literary techniques or, you know, structural elements or whatever it might be in the selected evidence in order to explain the role of that evidence in conveying meaning. So it links back to their thesis statement significantly. One of the other things is context as well. So a lot of the times for responses, your evidence needs to sort of provide a little bit of context as well. So we can look at incorporating maybe historical, cultural, or thorough context to enrich the analysis as well. So it's quite significant there. And then comprehensive evidence. I know I had this conversation with some of my 11 students the other day where they said, so how many sort of pieces of evidence do we need to say remember for a Othello sort of critical study response? And, you know, I think they were shocked, or some of them fell out of their chairs when I mentioned, you know, the number, which was quite significant. You know, you're looking at least 15 to 20 pieces of evidence that are needed. So quite significant. So they're drawing from multiple sections of the text to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the text. I think that's quite important for us to consider.
Absolutely. No, that you made some excellent points there. And it's not, and I always say to my students, it's not just having the quote or the evidence and having picked a great one. It's what you do with it, how you're actually analyzing the function and the role it's performing in supporting meaning and coming back to your thesis statement. And the more aligned all those things are, the more likely they're hitting the sophisticated and insightful verbiage of that higher order criteria. No, that's excellent. Well, I think that's really helpful. And obviously we're definitely going to have an episode where we go more deeply into evidence and give you some suggestions of like trial and error things that we've done to encourage that in our students. But just before we get to the end here, what are some overall, I think we can talk to all our listeners about some of these overall things that teachers can support students in doing so that the students can improve these essay writing skills, because it's definitely a process, and I find you do need to get a sense of how each student is doing, because every student that I've ever taught, even in one class of, let's say, advanced or standard, whatever it was, there are always pockets of kids that do really well at certain things in the essay writing and have aspects of the essay writing that they need to work with. So it does get to a point where you do need to engage with their draft so you can offer that specific feedback. But as a general, what are some things we can discuss now with our listeners? What are some general things that we can do to improve these essay writing skills and responses?
Awesome. So there's a few things. I apologize also if you can hear my puppy barking in the audio.
Apologize.
I think she's probably seen like a postman or something, and she's a bad dog. But anyway, let's go into this sort of question here. Look, some of the things that you can definitely do for our senior kids, get your kids to start looking at those, engaging with past papers. I think that's quite significant. I know the NESA website provides exam packs, and not just the questions, but they provide like markers feedback. So really scaffold that with your students to get them looking at it. Past papers. So utilize some of the NESA samples, the questions, the past HSC questions, in order to sort of get them familiar with the language in those essay sort of responses. I think that's quite significant. But as you sort of just mentioned, in order to develop like that Band 6 response or those effective essays, it needs to be a sustained practice. It's not something that they can just write in one night. It's a sustained practice of feedback and refinement across the entirety of those 2 years. Like I said, one of the ways which we can sort of, as teachers, support our students going through this is engaging with some of those past papers. I think also studying those exemplar responses. I think that's very, very important. I've mentioned this already in today's little episode where we analyze really effective responses. Now, some of them are available, again, on NESA's website. I sometimes struggle with the NESA booklets at times, the ones that they provide us with. So I'm sure that you guys are all fantastic teachers in your own right, and you've probably got exemplars from your past students that are far greater than some of those examples in these texts. Use those. Use those. Show the kids. Don't just give them the responses. Don't give them portions of it. So say, for example, you're working on introductions. Well, print out the introduction. Obviously, ask permission from your previous students beforehand. And generally, they're pretty all right in doing this as well. But
they're usually like, I don't need it anymore. I don't care what happens to it.
Exactly right. But use them because you know what effective writing looks like as the teacher. You're the practitioner in the room. So analyze these sort of really good responses in order to understand things like structure, language, analytical depth. Compare the different ranges. I mean, Google Scholar also provides some really good essays as well, which you can look at. So there's heaps and heaps of good things there.
That's great. Because they can project it on the board and even color code it in where's the thesis state and get your students to engage with that, like as a whole class discussion and breakdown. What's the point of each sentence? That's really helpful.
It's very important. Providing targeted sort of feedback, that's quite significant as well. So offer specific sort of guidance on thesis clarity, how they're using evidence or evidence selection, looking at like the analytical depth. So again, these are things that we need to scaffold as teachers for our students, because we can say, hey, your response lacks analytical depth, but what does that look like? So that would be like the next thing that we really need to do. And also encourage peer review sessions. Okay, so instead of them having to come to you all the time, engage them with, not for assessments. I will say this, and this is just a little bit of a word of warning here. Don't do it with, don't encourage too much peer review with assessment tasks, because that can often lead to collusion with their responses. But if you're doing in-class writing tasks, this is where you really do engage with the peer review stuff. So get them to foster that critical sort of self-assessment. And if they can see and pick out what good responses look like in other people's writing, well, they're going to see it naturally in their own responses. So that's quite significant there. Get them to master the rubric. So ensure the students understand the module's sort of rubric, the descriptors, the terms. So for example, if they're doing text and human experiences in the Year 12 Common Module, things like what is a human experience, anomalies, there's paradoxes, inconsistencies, words like textual integrity. What does this mean? So get them to understand that. Revision is important. So emphasize the exceptional essays are a result of a drafting process which includes multiple drafts, not just one or two. So students should revise based on feedback, focusing on refining their arguments and enhancing their analysis. And then the last sort of thing is enhancing the academic expression. This is probably the one that we neglect a little bit, but they need to develop a sophisticated vocabulary and fluency by reading high quality texts. And I sort of alluded to a little bit of Google Scholar here just a second ago. Get them to read and engage with literary sort of critiques of text or university-based scholarly articles that will allow them to see what good academic expression looks like. So these literary reviews or analytical essays will help them to emulate that formal and precise language that's required of them in developing good response. So I think probably this is probably one of those terms that we look at. It's a growth mindset is essential. So as teachers, we should we should reinforce that, in order to achieve those band 5 and 6 responses, it's attainable through dedication and, what we call like a step-by-step, baby step way of improving along the way. It's a journey as opposed to something that happens straight away. It's not that instant gratification that we all look for.
That's very true, Adriel. And I think those are really good student strategies. And I think as well as teachers and within our faculties, there are some things that we can do as well to help set up our students along the way to be able to engage in analytical responses and in producing an essay. So even in the, now everyone's going to be doing a lot of programming now to get their year 11 and 12 up to scratch. But even in the programming stage, if you know that your summative task is going to be an essay response, then backward map that and look at how you're teaching your text and what your teaching activities are across the term to encourage that. So put in, like you said, those little writing tasks and make them formative tasks. Like every 2 weeks, there could be a body paragraph on an idea. And if you know that you're doing an essay, I always think to myself, okay, so I know they've got to write an essay response. So as the teacher, what are some essays I would be expecting them to do? As in, like, what kinds of things am I expecting them to say in those essays? Or what would be appropriate responses to this essay question? And I know that we don't always know the essay question at the very start of the term, but if you know what your rubric and your topic is, you could have a mock essay question that is like the driving question for the entire term's unit of work. And then you know that you're, in that regard, you're scaffolding them to think critically before they even get to the writing stage. And then you've got, like, when I have lessons where I can say, oh, remember in week 3 and we did this, and then they go, oh yeah. And then suddenly it's like they realize this isn't an isolated thing, writing an essay response. It's a summation of everything I've been doing. I know that's easier said than done because we never have time to do all the things we want to do as English teachers. But if you are getting if you're lucky enough to get some programming time, and hopefully your schools are really supporting you in that, consider that backward mapping route and how your weekly lessons can build together as a whole to support students to not only think critically, but be able to respond critically as well.
No, it's fantastic. But look, it's a big journey. I think that's something that we sort of encourage our students, and if they become successful in this, it'll be something that will benefit them across all of their subjects, especially for our senior students. Like I was saying before, if you've got peers of yours that are in other KLAs, get them to jump on board, listen to this essay, and listen to the next few episodes of Lit Happens here, because it's probably applicable to all subject areas, how to write good, effective essays. So we'll see what we can do to engage with everyone and, engage with the cheat sheets that the wonderful Belle has provided here. It'll definitely help you out.
Thank you. We just we were really thinking what is something that all teachers could either, new scheme teachers need a bit more information on, and where us more experienced teachers just need a bit of a refresh, or just something really relevant to be productive and listen to, you know, on your way to or from school. So we really hope that, you know, today's little overview of essay writing has been really helpful. We're really grateful that you tune in to us here at Lit Happens. I know Adriel and I really appreciate it. And we just hope that these are some good insights today on essay response, overall aspects of it. And like we said, we are going to be doing more parters. So next week, tune in. We'd like to take you more deeply through introductions, structurally, their purpose, specifically the thesis production, because that's really at the core of what any essay response is. So if you want those fabulous insights that Adriel was giving us, particularly in terms of like the prescriptions and the band and the criterias, then we really hope you tune in with us through the next few episodes as well. A few things to take away from today. Remember that practice makes things a lot better. So constantly engaging your student in analytical thought and writing, you know, providing opportunities, like you said, Adriel, for peer reviews, for feedback, all of those things are really, really helpful. And yeah, continue to please engage with us on socials. Comment on if there's a certain part episode or a certain topic you'd like us to cover, and just please continue to like and subscribe and download and share all our resources. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, 100%. And remember, we're going to be popping up that poll for our lit or quit questionnaire there. We want to see what you guys think. I think we'll do it on Instagram. Is that where our
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
good.
Look, Adriel and I are not in our personal world social media people. So thank you so much for those of you who've been engaging with the type of content we're trying to create. Honestly, it makes me feel really old, Adriel, like trying to be on TikTok and Instagram. It's very funny, because it's like, what would I like to see, but what would other people like to? It's just, I don't know, because we're both not social media people. We're giving it a good crack. There's always something new to learn and do, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. No, it's so good.
It.
So good. Awesome. Well, no, thank you guys. Thank you guys once again. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys next week.